But let's put the focus now on the sugar space. A recent report by ratings agency ICRA suggests that record sugar production in 2018 could see production outstrip consumption in excess of 4 million metric tons. So what does this exactly mean for sugar manufacturers in terms of their profitability and sugar prices, of course, going ahead? And the question, of course, are exports really the need of the hour to tackle this problem of plenty? To discuss all this, we're joined now by Sabyasachi Majumdar, Senior Vice President at ICRA. Mr. Majumdar, thanks so much for joining in. Good to have you on. The ISMA revision recently that they put out, they revised their 2018 sugar production estimate to 29.5 million tons. This is a new record as far as production goes. Just give us a sense of what really factored into this kind of output this year.
See, I think basically what has happened in this year is that almost all the key sugar producing regions, which is basically UP, Maharashtra and Northern Karnataka, all the three have had record productions and very high levels of production. In UP, basically the production has been driven by the fact that over the last 3 to 4 years, a new variety of cane has been introduced, which has both a very high yield as well as very high recovery rates. So traditionally, UP in the let's say around 2010 to 2015 period, the recovery rates had been a low 9%, but we have seen that most of the mills are now recording recovery rates about 10.5 to 11.5%. This apart, the yield is also much higher for the cane. So overall production for UP has increased. Maharashtra traditionally, of course, is a high production region, but 2014 and 2015 there were two very bad monsoons which had impacted production in 14-15 as well as 15-16. So now there's a recovery from that, and in fact the recovery has been much sharper than what was anticipated for Maharashtra and Northern Karnataka. So these are basically the key factors which are really driving the sugar production to a record high.
All right, so that's higher than expected production coming in for Maharashtra, UP, Northern Karnataka, and this is of course the second consecutive year that we've seen this kind of oversupply. So that's the supply picture on one side, but if we talk about the demand side of things, how are things looking on that front?
Okay, let me come back to the supply side. The previous year, of course, the production had been relatively, there had been a significant recovery over 15-16, but still overall the production had not outstripped consumption the previous sugar year. So it's only this sugar year that the production is significantly increasing the consumption. Now what we have seen on the consumption side is that overall the consumption growth has been relatively modest at around 2 to 3%, because this is a fairly mature food commodity, and so we don't really expect very significant growth in offtake. Plus, on the health side also there's a lot of consciousness about, lots of people trying to move to sugar-free or relatively low sugar drinks and confectionery items. So because of that, the sugar demand growth itself has been fairly, low single digits over the past few years, and we don't really expect the trend to change. Yes, there might be occasional years because, let's say, of an extremely strong, summer, you have more than normal irrigated water consumption. So there could be some minor spikes in sugar demand, but we really don't see sugar demand growing at more than 2 to 3% on a sustained basis. So essentially the imbalance which has been caused in this year is not so much a demand weakness, but a strength on the side of the supply.
All right, so this isn't a trend, at least on the demand side of things, where we can expect any sort of reversal anytime soon. And by the estimates that you've put out, production may outstrip consumption by 4 to 4.5 million metric tons this time around. So that's quite a gap. Now the logical, solution to this would be exports, of course. So what kind of, expectations do you have on the export front? Because by some estimates, the industry is looking to export about 1.5 to 2 million tons this time. Is this a realistic target?
See, the thing is, the export market is also not very lucrative right now. Overall, there is a global oversupply, and if you look at the international white sugar prices, they would be somewhere around $370, $380 per ton for white sugar. So which means that if Indian sugar mills were to export, their net realization at the factory gate is unlikely to be anything more than 24 rupees per kg, which would be much lower than what they are getting in the domestic market. So on its own, export realizations would be at a loss. However, it has to be countered. However, it is to also be seen in the light of the fact that the sugar mills are able to export. Then, of course, there is a less pressure on the domestic position, domestic stock position. So to that extent, the domestic prices may be supported. So it's in that light that the domestic sugar industry is seeing exports, and obviously the expectation from the industry side is that just as in 2015 the government had introduced sort of a subsidy regime for export, although it was not directly an export subsidy, but it was given as a cane subsidy, so as to make the whole thing WTO compliant. So some similar measures definitely the industry is expecting from the government side. Whether that will come from the government or not, that remains to be seen.
Absolutely, like you said, there is this expectation from the industry that the government may take a call to scrap export duty on sugar. So that should be a boost for some of the players. But very quickly, just give us a sense of what your picks are in an environment like this in the sugar space. Which are the players that you would really be betting on?
See, we don't really speak about individual scripts, but overall, we see the success factors for sugar mills have not really changed over the years. Essentially, very efficient sugar mills which have strong control over operating overheads, which have relatively high recovery rates compared to the peers, and also which are fully integrated in the sense that they are able to use their entire byproducts such as molasses and bagasse for production of ethanol, ENA and power. Those are the kind of sugar mills that are relatively more successful than others, and they are best able to ride out these cyclical trends. I mean, sugar industry has been cyclical and I presume will remain cyclical, but through the cycles we feel that mills which are relatively efficient in terms of recovery rates, overhead cost and forward integration, they will always be better placed to ride out these cycles. This apart, mills which have a relatively strong capital structure with limited debt, those are the kind of mills which will do well, or relatively the downside will be protected to some extent because of these protective factors.
All right, fair enough. We'll leave it at that. Thanks so much, Sabyasachi Majumdar, Senior Vice President at ICRA, giving us a sense of the sugar industry at this point. But with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Trending Today. Thank you so much for watching.